Hey Joe, how you going?
Hello, Bede. Good, thanks. Good to
Good,
see you again.
good. Now, if you remember what we were talking about last time, uh, we were talking about freedom, and I said that what we're going to do is that we're going to look at what is how do we because see the whole point with Swami Dayananda's approach is a discovery of what freedom is while we're living.
Hmm.
So not freedom when we die, go to heaven or whatever it is, but
Yeah.
freedom while we're living. And the thing is that when we look at a human being, there are three major aspects of a human being, an individual. There's their heart, their cognition, and their conduct.
Their heart, their mind, and their conduct. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the heart, like what we were saying, was that the heart is depending on what values are governing us. That's our heart. So if my heart, for example, is that I want to uh, get love and approval from other people. If that is the emotional direction of my life, that's what moves me. Everything becomes a function of that movement. So, for
Mhm.
example, and what we're going to be talking about today, particularly my conduct will be a function of that desire. So, when I meet you, I'll say, "Oh, hi, Joe. How are you going? Nice to see you." Right? But the thing is that so I've learned how to get approval. So I've got various strategies of what to do when I'm getting in order to get approval.
Mhm.
I'll have certain behavior that I'll engage in when I don't get the approval I want. So, but that type of behavior that is a function of a binding desire is not free.
Right. We're moved to do it out of some wish to have something or be something or
Yeah,
mm,
yeah. So what's happening is that when the context for my conduct is this binding desire, for example, to have love and approval, I'll be looking at people and watching them. Are they approving me? Oh, they do. Oh, they are. And I'll have gained strategies to get approval, maybe politeness. Not saying there's nothing wrong with politeness, but what I'm saying is that we're talking about conduct that is a function of a binding desire.
yeah,
And
we're
this
not just doing it lovingly without any expectation for a return.
Absolutely not. We're
Mm.
we're engaged in the activity of being a good look in my own eyes and the eyes of other people. Because
We want, we want
if
love
you
back.
if you give me approval, then I can feel self-approval.
Mm,
And I desperately want self-approval.
mm.
And the reason I desperately want self-approval, as we've gone over, is because I don't feel deep down I've got self-disapproval. Otherwise, I wouldn't be hankering after approval from others.
Mm,
So the
mm.
basis of it, this binding desire. But we can see then that my conduct is not free. Okay, I might choose to brag a little bit, or I might choose to do this, but it's all in the context. What's determining what how I'm seeing you and what I'm doing in relation to you is this desire to be liked and admired.
Yeah, so we're caught up by the fear of the disapproval.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah, because if I get, we actually, what we really fear is the self disapproval being exposed.
mm. It's a painful state inside, isn't it? We don't want to repeat it on the outside.
No, 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 no. Okay. So now we hear a lot about so the basis of human life that isn't enlightened by wisdom, by necessity, is governed by binding desires.
Hmm.
The way that I go about satisfying binding desires, that's determined by my past. Okay, but the past is not causing me to be the way I am being. You know how a lot of psychodynamic people think that it's the past experiences that is determining the present. It's not the past experiences. It's the binding desires is the linchpin. It's centered
So
on
perhaps the past is just shaping the way we've trained ourselves to try and meet that need.
yeah.
But it's not the cause of the need, but we've just had practice at doing it this
Yeah.
way, and that works, and that doesn't work. And
The form my personality takes, the form that I present to myself and to other people, that's culturally and it's determined by past experience.
right.
But that isn't the governing factor of my life. It's this misdirected value. In order for me to feel right in myself, I must get approval and love from other people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And we can see that if this is the case, there's no freedom. So the question is, okay, so here we are, we're caught in this. How do we actually grow out of it? Okay, how do we grow out of the infantile demand to be loved and liked?
Good question.
That's the point. Now, what Swami Dayananda does is he gives us a way out, which is towards freedom. And that's what I want to talk about today.
Right.
All right. So the thing is that besides that, we as human beings, we have what we call the dharmic striving, a striving for dharma. In other words, we actually have a striving, and this striving doesn't come from our binding desires or our past experiences.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from the fact that besides normally speaking, we're being a personality, but what Swami Dayananda points out and shows us is what it means to be a simple conscious person, the person. And he said something very interesting about the person. He said, and he called the simple, you as a simple conscious person, the basic person. And he says, the basic person, the dynamic form of the basic person is love and care. In other words, the more real part of us, which is ourselves as a basic person, has a striving towards Dharma. In other words, a striving to be loving and a striving to be caring. Okay? And
Right.
so, but the thing is that this is so important because this is what liberates us from binding desires. That when I am being moved by love or or goodwill or caring, which is concern, when I'm being moved by that and living my life from that in my response to present events, this opens up an entirely different way of life for me. This is the only thing that will open up a new life. So this is what he calls learning to live a life of Dharma. Now, let's just have a look at that. This is the difference. So what happens is I come to you and I've got this agenda. I want love and approval, and you're going to give it to me. And I hope to get it from you. Or maybe I've got it from you last week and I want a bit more of it today. It's like a bucket that gets empty. I know where I can get my hit. Right? So I'm coming to you from my binding desire. Right? And that's going to determine how I see and how I act. What happens if I come to you with a desire to be loving or non-harmful, to be accepting, and to be caring? In other words, to bring the value that's actually needed to this present situation.
Well, it's a pretty big change because before you were a consumer of my response.
Yeah.
And now you're actually bringing something to the table, right?
Yes. I've shifted from being a consumer to being a contributor, as Swami Dayananda calls it, right? Now, this is very, very important, because people talk about, oh, you got to live in the present, live in the now, and all that stuff. Well, okay, well, whoop-de-dee-doo-dee-dum. What does that mean? When what is moving me is goodwill and concern, when that's moving me, what happens is I will be responsive, consciously responsive to what is happening now. Whereas when I'm caught up in binding desires, I'm only reacting. I'm reacting to what you're saying and doing. So when you are saying something I like, I go, oh, I like that. I like Joe. He's a good guy. When you don't, I don't like Joe. He's a bad guy. Right? So one is reactivity. It has nothing to do with responsiveness to what is actually happening. All right?
I guess you're being more selective when you're caught up in binding desires, because you only respond to the things that make you feel better or make you feel like you're getting what you want, and everything else is...
Yeah. When we talk about the context determines meaning, so the context of a binding desire is going to determine the meaning of events that are happening around me. So the meaning is when you're treating me the way I want to, I'm saying Joe's a good guy, I like Joe. When Joe doesn't, I don't like Joe, I can't stand it. Now, so the beginning, you know how we were talking about the value of values?
Yes.
Right? You see, when I actually see that being non-harmful or being loving or expressing goodwill is a value, that it actually is a life-enhancing value. If I see, so even if I'm used to being caught up in binding desires and all of this sort of stuff, right? But through the teaching, I come to understand that acting non-harmfully and bringing value to the table is a good thing. Now, if I really see it as good, even though I don't really feel like doing it much, that desire to do the good, to live an ethical life, comes from me as a basic person. It doesn't come from me as personality, which has been formed by the binding desires and the past experience in the terms of the routines that I've learned and all of this sort of stuff. Okay, so what we have is we have a dialectic between me being reactive or me being consciously responsive to what's happening in front of me. Entirely different. One opens up an entirely different way of life. And what's important here is that just a minute. What's important here is that if we want to begin to have a normal life, what has to measure us daily is am I in my responsiveness being loving? And am I in my responsiveness being caring? And if I see that being loving and being caring is the right way to live, and I see the value of that, and that value becomes valuable to me, then I will be moved. I will be moved to be loving and caring.
Do you call them dharmic virtues? Like, would you say that when you see the value of a virtue, you would want to express that and come from that.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
It's similar. It's,
Mhm.
in Vedanta, they talk about the third striving, which the first one is security, then the second one is pleasure, and the third one that they talk about is dharma, right? So this is what dharma, a life of dharma does, is it brings us into harmony with life. It brings us into harmony with life. And
Right.
so you might be wondering, well, yeah, but I'm pretty egocentric, and I'm concerned about what people think of me, and I do like to be liked, whether I like it or not. I can't seem to get out of it, and all that stuff. You don't worry about that.
Mm.
What you're doing is, for Dayananda, you outgrow it.
Okay.
You don't try and fight it. You outgrow it.
So would he say that the dharmic life is acquired, you grow into it, you're just saying.
You make your daily life a learning ground to learn to live a life of dharma.
But you said earlier that we've got something innate within us that desires us to move towards that.
Yeah, of course.
Mm.
But we may not have learned how to satisfy the dharmic strivings yet.
Right.
Okay.
So it can remain dormant then.
Yeah. Well.
If I'm caught up in the binding desires, and that's the kind of life I choose. Yeah.
It has to start somewhere, and then it can grow. He calls this emotional maturity. That when you want to be loving, and you want to be caring, he says, then when you want to do what you need to do, he says, then you're free and you're emotionally mature, because you're moved by the striving. You're not being moved by binding desires.
Yeah.
Right? Now, this is where it gets difficult, though. And this is, you see, once we make love and care, or goodwill and concern, the measure of our life, what happens is, let's say that you decide, okay, what I'm going to do, no matter what people say and do, I'm going to make sure that my response to people is going to be loving and caring, no matter what. Doesn't matter what they do. I am not going to change. I am going to remain the same in the sense of my commitment to Dharma. And what he called love, for Dayananda, that meant being accepting and caring, of course, is to taking care of, bringing the value that's needed for the situation.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that sounds like a great ideal, but it sounds difficult to live up to.
Well, first of all, it's not an ideal, right?
Okay.
I'll just explain that.
Mm-hmm.
Here I am, I'm with you right here, right now, right? And I notice that I'm suddenly full of ill will because you've said something I don't like. Now, what Swami Dayananda says is that we can't control our emotional reactions. We've got no choice over that. We've only got choice over how we act. So you've said or done something that I don't like, and I'm reactive because it's frustrated some binding desire. And I'm feeling a little, and how I know it's a binding desire, I'm disturbed, I'm full of ill will. Just understand that when you're full of ill will, the meaning of it is that you're wanting something and you're not getting it. Okay? You're wanting something and you're not getting it. So inside you're now moved. There's a movement in you where you would like to retaliate, for example. Have you ever had that experience where you want to retaliate?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Right. Now, notice that if you do retaliate, you are conforming your actions to the binding desire.
Right. So you're kind of going along with it then.
Yep. You're being determined by the binding desire. Your life is being determined by your desire to have a certain type of experience that you think that you need in order to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
right? But because you now have seen, you see, if I come to arrive at, and if I don't arrive at this point, there's going to be no change in me. Unless I see, yes, it would be good if my responsiveness to people and events was loving and caring, accepting and bringing the value that's needed. If I see that that is good, I will have a will towards it. It might not be strong. I may not be moved from it. Because I'm full of ill will. You've done something I don't like. But the beginning of the practice of karma yoga is remaining the same. So I'm going to remain the same. I'm going to remain, in terms of my conduct is going to be loving, and my conduct is going to be caring.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
So just a thought came to me, and maybe it's not the right time to ask it, but you tell me. So how does that not set a person up for abuse? That I could think, oh, it's nice to give that person this and be there for that person, and before you know it, I'm not actually really doing anything useful. I'm just being there for other people.
Yeah. Then that's not caring for myself.
Uh-huh.
That's
okay.
See, there's no such thing as...
Include himself in that, yeah.
There's no such thing as dumb love, unintelligent love. Love, in the fullest sense of the word, has to be intelligent. In other words, it has to be an intelligent, responsive to what's needed. Okay. It doesn't mean being a doormat. It means doing what is needful. That might mean saying, no, you stop that. I'm not going to deal with that. But you can say, stop that. I'm not going to deal with that. But you're not doing it to get revenge or to attack.
Right. Okay. That's a big distinction. Yeah.
So you're handling life objectively.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So
got it.
So what happens is, when you notice with acceptance or goodwill, when you're being accepting or full of goodwill, to the degree you fall away from that, you become hostile or resentful or hostile, don't you?
Yeah.
So every time you notice that you have this, that ill will feeling towards others, have you ever had that? A feeling of like, oh God, I can't stand that person, right?
Definitely.
Right. Now, we don't condemn ourselves for it. Because we've committed our life to Dharma and to have a loving relation to the world, in other words, an accepting or expressing goodwill even to our enemies, right? What happens is that because we're committed to that, we will then see when we're not being like that. And as soon as we recognize, oh, I'm full of ill will, that means that I can only move away from what I'm aware of. Okay? So as soon as I'm full of ill will, I go, I better not act from the ill will. I'm acknowledging it honestly. Yes, I would like to wring Joe's neck, but I'm not going to act from that ill will. In other words, I'm not going to give it any energy. I'm not going to feed it. Rather, I'm going to do a loving act. So even if I feel ill will, I can still do a loving act, can't I?
Yeah, sure.
But we're not dealing with psychological behaviorism. We're not trying to change behavior. We're learning to live a life of Dharma, which is we want to conform our acts in such a way that it's expressive of goodwill and expressive of concern or caring.
So we've got to kind of be prepared to go against the grain, because what I want is not always what would be good to do, right? So I have to recognize that I have to go against my own,
you're going to go against yourself as personality and live a conscious, responsive life, right? Based on Dharma. Now, if you see the value of Dharma, even if you don't feel like it, you will have an urge to live that way. So you're still doing what you want, but you're doing what you want as a simple, basic person, not as personality.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
so
it's not a manufactured someone that I'm coming from.
I'm not trying to become a better version of myself. I want to live a consciously responsive life based on goodwill and concern, or love and care.
Yeah.
Right? And no matter what the world's like, I want to remain the same. Dayananda says that yoga is sameness. So this remaining the same in terms of conduct is the practice of yoga.
Wow, that's good. Mm-hmm.
And he said at the beginning, you're going to have friction.
It's bound to be there, isn't it?
Absolutely. It still is for me today. Sometimes what happens is when I suddenly, when you can have ill will towards someone and you kind of like it, you kind of believe it. Do you know what I mean? You're in a
So the friction would be more with myself than with my sort of former self or inclined self, rather than the world, right? Because the world present me with all sorts of things that I want, and I'm bound to desire. I'm going to have to go against that.
Yeah, but you're not going to push against it per se. You recognize that's happening now. This is what I need to do. So it's the birth of a new life. Where, see, Dayananda thinks that us adults have the emotional age of a 6-year-old. And he said
so the clarity of what to do grows. It doesn't sort of
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
He said you gain more and more clarity, more and more discrimination, because the more, what's very important is a life of Dharma will create an interplay between you as a reactive personality who's obsessed with their binding desires, and you as a simple conscious person who wants to see what's actually happening and respond to what's happening in the best possible way. Right? And he said that you may not feel loving at the beginning, and then he said you got to fake it till you make it. There's a play on words. I hate that expression, actually, but
you got to pretend to be an adult before you become one.
Yeah, in the sense that even though my heart is not in it. So at the beginning of Dharma, you've got these principles, objective principles that are external to me. So I will live by these principles. I will live by the principle of goodwill, and I'll live by the principle of concern. And when I do, then I will notice when I'm acting in some kind of attacking fashion towards other people. And I'll also notice when I'm not doing the needful. I'm not concerned or caring. Right? But what happens is then there's a shift from you living. It's an external principle that, in other words, you're not wholehearted about it. You don't necessarily, you know that it's good, and because you know that it's good, ultimately it's better for you. You're willing to do it. So there has to be some value there, right? But when the value becomes assimilated, you find yourself, I want to live harmoniously with other people. I don't want to attack them. Do you know what I mean? I want to do what bring the value that the situation is needed. This is what he called emotional growth, because the word emotion means what moves, out, what moves you out, right? So what moves us as human beings is what changes us, right?
Yeah.
So if there's no change in what moves us, we don't change. So, but it's not good enough just simply to have the desire. You have to actually live the value, because when you live the value, it becomes incorporated into your heart.
Yeah, it almost seems, though, the way that you're describing it, that I have to go against my emotions or not allow my emotions to dominate if they're not aligned with the good.
Well, if your reactive emotions, which are based on binding desire,
Okay.
as
Okay.
opposed to the non-reactive, love is an emotion. It's a move. When love is in your heart, goodwill is
Sure.
in your
Yeah.
heart, you will
Yep.
find that you will act rightly with other people. When
Yep.
caring is active in your heart, you will find you'll take care of yourself and other people in the right way.
Yeah.
Because you've got the basis to do that. But
Yeah.
at the beginning, if you've lived, this is the whole point. At the beginning, we live by the principle of love and care. And then, but when the value is assimilated, then we live from love and care. In other words, we're moved in our heart by love and care. So we're being accepting because that's the way we like to be. We like to be accepting. Have you heard people go, that they've got a very low tolerance, so that goodwill goes out the door as soon as someone does anything they don't like. They just, have you seen that?
Yeah, yeah.
That is
Sure.
emotional immaturity.
Yeah. So we have to kind of develop some emotional intelligence to recognize some emotions are not going to be coming from goodwill and concern for others.
Well,
and then to see that the Dharmic life isn't going to come from that, following that.
yeah. A dharmic life is an emotional life, but it's emotionally mature in the sense that the emotions that are governing us are love and care or concern
Right.
or goodwill.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Emotional immaturity is emotional reactivity, because what goes out the door when you don't get what you want? Goodwill goes out the door and you become full of hate.
Sure, it's the first thing to leave.
Yep. Or caring goes out. You might know you need to tidy your room now, but I'll do it tomorrow, right? So you can see that when we respond with caring, we bring the value that's needed. What is determining our actions is what is happening in the world. So we're living in the world as it is, and then we're responding to it. Now, what puts us, Swami Dayananda gives a wonderful psychological principle here. He says the basis of reaction is non-acceptance of a fact. So when we are not reacting, but we're being accepting, which is goodwill, right? That puts us in the world as it is. Okay, that actually places us so that we're actually arriving and we're conscious of what's happening in front of us as it is. So we're conscious. But it doesn't keep us in harmony with what is. Caring keeps us in harmony with what is. So, for example, I might have, in terms of goodwill, I might think, oh, my spouse would like would like a cup of tea. So, darling, would you like me to make you a cup of tea? Right? But if I just have the goodwill, but I don't live the goodwill in a practical and useful way, then what happens is you start to, when there's no caring, you've got what happens is you get, first of all, neglect, and then you get ruthless disregard.
Yeah, right. There's no point saying, would you like a cup of tea? And while you're at it, can you make me one?
No. So the whole point with life is that when you shift so you don't try and get rid of binding desires. We want to outgrow binding desires, right? And every time you act from goodwill and concern, you are incorporating the value of that into your heart by your living it. It's not just going to happen all by itself. Oh, yes, I'm going to be a loving person. I've decided I'm going to be loving. Well, whoop-de-dee-doo-dee-dum. Dayananda says you only discover love when you're being loving, in loving itself. You only discover what caring is when you're caring.
Yeah, and that's exercised in in every situation. It's no good saying, oh, well, I'm going to be loving and caring if it was only if it was only, you know, for those people who would leave my life because they make it difficult to do so.
Yes. And what
You
about this
know,
one?
there's-
I'm going to become a loving person. Well, that's nice. That's an idealized version.
right.
You see the difference between I might want to become a loving person because I think, oh, that'll be good and spiritual and everything else, right? But the test is right here, right now, I'm facing you.
Mhm.
How am I relating to you? Is it in an accepting and caring way, or isn't it? That's nothing to do with idealism. That is to do with moving away from wrong living to right living.
So by idealism, you mean striving to be something that I've idealized in my own
Yeah,
mind of
to be a better version of yourself.
future self,
Have you
some
heard
kind of
that one?
future self.
Yeah, a
Yeah,
future
to be a
self.
better person. That's it.
Be a better person. We're not interested in being a
Best.
better person.
I want to be the best.
Yeah. Now, can you see what happens? Let's say, for example, I say, Joe, would you like a cup of coffee? Yep, yeah, I'll make you a cup of coffee. And I go, my God, am I good or am I good?
Mm.
That is still being a consumer. I am doing it so I can feel good in myself.
Yep.
Right? Now, the interesting thing is that we have, as human beings, coming from the person, we have higher strivings, right? Which is, thank goodness for that. Because without them, you see, you notice that, isn't it interesting how when we talk about, God is goodness and intelligence, right?
Yep.
That's one way of describing God.
Yes.
So the thing is, or goodness and truth, right? And because of the Plato, goodness, beauty, and truth, right?
Love and wisdom, yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is that, what was I going to say? I've just lost my train of thought. Hold it. Oh yeah. So we have a higher striving that we want to satisfy, right? And because of that striving, for example, have you noticed that that even though it might be unpleasant, have you noticed that when you really recognize at the moment I'm being a jerk, and there's a release with actually seeing that you're being a jerk when you're being a jerk. So something in us loves the truth. Not ourselves as personality. Ourselves as personality does not like the truth.
Yeah. Sort of like, thank God the door's open, the light's coming in.
Yeah.
Even though it's unpleasant what I see.
Yes. Because the higher strivings, that we have a higher striving in us for the truth. We have a higher striving for goodness. We also have a higher striving for beauty. We tend towards our highest aspirations, lean towards those things.
Right? That's just sort of a deeper part of us that we have to allow to come to the surface. Otherwise, we're not going to live a dharmic life, right?
Yeah. Well, a dharmic life is what brings it to the surface.
Okay.
So by living a life of dharma, you are instead of these values being sort of a little bit remote, right? Now, the way he explains this, they've got these what they called? What's it called? The gunas. I think it's called the gunas in Sanskrit, right? But it's the three types of energy. You've got inertia, right? Now, inertia, here I am, I've been born into the world and I've adapted to it and all of that stuff. And I'm living a life of binding desires and I've learned to satisfy them or not, well or not, whatever, but everyone does this. So everyone's starting point is that they're an ego-bound being caught up with binding desires. Right?
Right, especially as a young kid, I try to do my best to get the best of what I like to have. Right?
Yeah, and that's just the way life works, right? But it's inertia. In other words, it's passive. So that developments happen because of events and other people. So here I am, I arrive as this person caught up with binding desires. This is before I come to a spiritual teaching, right? Now that's called inertia or tamasa. They call it inertia. It's not based on conscious awareness of what's happening, a discrimination of what would be good to do. It's not based on any of that. It's based on that these are habit patterns that I have developed in order to get my binding desires, right?
Yeah.
And now, so that's inertia. Now, the way you break inertia is through conscious, deliberate action. We call reactive activity. It's conscious, right? So what happens is I deliberately live a dharmic life. I deliberately measure my life against. So, for example, you suddenly see you're angry and you go, okay, that's wrong. I'm full of ill will. I won't act this out. I'm not going to dramatize it, right? Now I'm consciously, and I have to consciously and deliberately do it, don't I? But as you keep,
that's real effort, isn't it? Because
yeah,
you're not necessarily getting what you like, which is what
no,
the previous dealing with the resisting force of the world. I mean, it's kind of
yes,
like
but
I try to
yes,
find ways to get it to meet my needs,
yes,
my desires.
yeah, but we're
But now
shifting,
we're really becoming conscious of something.
and
And
we're satisfying our higher strivings.
yeah,
You see what I mean? So, and the way the Hindus talk about that is dharmic striving. It's a striving, right? So what happens is, it's reactive. We're working hard at it. You know what I mean? We're working consciously. We go, okay, I know what I need to do. I just don't feel like doing it. Yeah, okay, but okay. So you recognize you're being neglectful. You're not being caring. You're not doing what needs. I'll do the dishes in half an hour. I love that one.
Yeah, right.
Okay, but you kind of know that doing that doesn't really bring you into harmony with life, because now this is
That's right. Yeah.
what Dayananda says is that the basic person is a striving of love and care. If I am living in a way that's not loving and caring, there is a rupture in me. He says there's a rupture in me, right? I'm split because my way of living is not conforming to my higher dharmic strivings. But he said you become whole as a person when you conform your actions to this, because there's now not a difference between what you're wanting and what you're doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you as thinker and you as doer come together, right? So what happens is you go through the tamasic stage, this activity, conscious, deliberate activity. You're not pursuing an ideal. This is, how Dayananda says it's cognitive all the way. You're looking what's happening, what would be good to do, and then you're doing it. That is nothing to do.
Because an ideal suffers from merit seeking, doesn't it? Like if I say, okay, I'm not going to do the dishes, because I want to do something of my own.
Yeah.
Whereas doing the dishes for the sake of someone else is going to give me what I like.
Yeah.
The feedback of, that's great, Joe. I'd love to do that every night, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But we're doing it because we see the value of doing what is good.
We're doing the good for the good.
Yeah.
You see, when we value the good, which is being loving and caring,
for the sake of recognizing that it's good to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now this is where you come to the next page. So you've got the inertia which we're born into, right? So even a person who gets angry is not reactive. It's not It's not activity, right? Dayananda says you've got to go through the reactive stage, and then what happens is you have these moments where you're now being spontaneous. You are spontaneously being kind. You are spontaneously doing caring. You're not self-conscious. You're not going, oh my God, am I good or am I good doing this? Right? It's got nothing, because the fact is I've done something. That's it. But if I quack all day, it doesn't make me a duck, does it?
No.
So what happens is that if I associate my actions with an idealized version of myself, am I good because I've done all these things? That is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, first of all, living in the world as it is and responding to that world in the best possible way by bringing the value that's needed. Right? And
Yeah.
and every time we live, every time we actually take a move towards those values, those higher values, we incorporate those values into our heart.
Right. So at first it's difficult to go
Yep.
against what I'm used to and inclined to do,
Yep.
like not do the dishes and instead do
Yep.
whatever I prefer to do.
Yep.
But gradually you can come to love that you're doing something for the sake of goodness, goodwill, you know,
You love
and
being loving and you love
and
being
then
caring.
you begin to love that in
Yes.
itself,
Yes.
right?
You
And
love
that
the
then
cook.
motivates you to overcome that resistance to always putting it off or
Yeah.
not doing it at all.
Yes. If you look
Right.
at if you look at a person, say you're doing counseling or whatever, you can
Mm.
clearly see that some people have no tolerance for what people do that they don't like, and they become full of ill will, and also they engage in destructive actions like drugs or pornography or whatever, right? And they they become neglectful. They cease to be caring,
Mm.
right? And so you can
Mm.
see that when they're imbued with caring and goodwill, that lifts them out of a whole lot of crap.
Yeah, that's a great insight. Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is, that's why Dayananda says emotional maturity. You're emotionally mature when you want to do what you need to do. And he says, then you're free.
Yeah, so that when that becomes your chief concern, not that you'll always be there, and
No.
you know, we all fall, I suppose,
Yeah.
constantly, but
Yeah.
when that's at least anchored in our heart, then
Yes.
then that
And
makes
yeah. So
go on.
when we're talking about the transformation of the individual, right, in terms of conduct, can you see that when I'm acting from love and I'm acting from concern, I am being free in terms of conduct. My conduct isn't being, if I retaliate to you, then you're causing my retaliation, aren't you? I'm being determined.
So what am I free from? I'm free from being caught up by the need to want something in response because I'm consuming and I'm not getting that, or I'm seeking that, and
Yes.
I'm free from all that,
Yeah,
right?
and when so, but it's like a puppet. You're the puppet master. I make the world my puppet master. So when you treat me well, Joe, I love it, and I feel
Mm-hmm.
happy and elated. And when you don't, I feel depressed.
Mm.
I'm like a billiard ball. There's no freedom in that, is there?
No, that's right. Yep.
So,
Yeah.
but when we live a dharmic life, we're not being determined by our binding desires, because they become neutralized. In other words, they don't determine how I see or how I act. We're growing out of them, right? And we're not being, and so what we're not being determined by how we see and how we act. In a dharmic life, what determines how I see is what's happening in front of me. So what happens in front of me is I'm seeing it. I'm not making up what's happening in front of me. I discover what's happening in front of me. I'm aware of what's happening in front of me because it's there. I'm seeing it, and then I respond. So
Right.
I'm learning to live a life of Dharma. Is it easy? No, it's not. Because if we take this seriously, you will see every day where you become non-accepting or unloving, which is the same thing for Dayananda. When you're being accepting, or he calls it accommodation, you're making room for everything, even things you don't like. It's not,
Yeah.
you can still be accepting even if you don't like it. In other words, you're not resisting it or fighting. You see what I mean? So, which brings, so when you have a way of living in the world that's not conflicting, not fighting yourself, other people, or the world, you bring about peace to your life.
Right. So you become freer and freer because you become more deeply accepting of things as just as they are,
Right.
however they are.
Yeah. Because you're not.
Even though you still do what's needed, but
Yeah.
you don't sort of inwardly turned and twisted by it.
Yeah. You're living in the world as it is.
Mm.
That's why he called it the yoga of objectivity. You're because it's there, you're seeing it. And the thing is that so all I wanted to go over tonight was this fact that it's all very well saying, I want freedom. I want freedom. I want moksha. I want freedom. Right? Well, that's good. Very good. But the thing is that if we really want freedom, we'll become very interested in learning how to live freely in terms of our conduct.
It's almost counterintuitive, isn't it, Bede? Because we tend to think of freedom as a consumer, that if I only consume the right things, I'll become free.
That's it.
Yeah. But in actual fact, it's the opposite. So it goes against the grain. Yes.
If we don't live from this higher dharmic strivings, if we don't live from those strivings, right? Because the whole point is that we want to transform the heart, right? And then the problem with the heart is that you've got true values that are true and real and values that are false. When our heart is dominated by false values or binding desires, as Swami Dayananda calls it, we'll have one kind of life, or one way of being in the world. When our heart is imbued with these spiritual strivings of being loving and caring, then a different kind of way of life comes alive in us. But it's not caused by past conditions, and it's not caused by or misdirecting values. It can become wholehearted. So you're basically, when you reach that spontaneous point where you've done your work of being consciously deliberate, now you're being spontaneously loving and caring.
Right, then the fake it stage is over.
Sorry?
Then the fake it stage is over.
Yeah, the fake it stage is over. But as you said before, it's how Dayananda puts it is that it's like a Polaroid photograph that becomes developing. You first of all see the details, and as it comes clearer and clearer and clearer, you see more and more details. A life of Dharma is like that too. It's a journey without end, actually. But what it does fundamentally, because you're becoming whole as a person, because in other words, is that what you know to be right and good, and your life, your way of living is conforming to that goodness, you become complete. You can't have a feeling of completeness when there's a split. So if we're living a life of binding desires, you can't have a peace of mind, and you cannot have self-acceptance. Not possible. Doesn't matter what you do. You might get skilled. Like you might say, well, Bede, I know how to actually help you learn certain behaviors where you'll be able to get the love and acceptance you want. You know what I mean? So first of all, do this and this and this and this, and then people are like you. It's like when people do that Dale Carnegie stuff. Oh, hi, Joe. How are you? Lovely to meet you, Joe. And tell me, Joe, when did you get into this business? All that stuff.
Don't kick over the beehive if you want that.
So
that's a strategy, though, isn't it? You're talking about a strategy versus a wholehearted love of the good.
Of the good, and that's what frees us. Loving the good frees us, because when you love the good, that frees us from loving things that are not good, that we think are good. So when I really love being loving and being caring, then what happens is I don't love getting love and approval. I've grown out of it. It's not that I've tried to get whatever. It's that I've learned to live a different kind of life.
Yeah.
Right. So, and this is important because for Swami Dayananda, the whole point is arriving in a place where you are being free while living.
Yeah, and if you don't actually practice that first, you will never experience that freedom. You'll always continue to think that freedom is in the life that you've always lived, and just doing more of it, or doing it differently, or getting cleverer at it. Or
if I learn all the theory, I can know all the theory. the theory is not going to help me when my spouse has said or done something I don't like, and I'm full of ill will. The theory, I can have all sorts of spiritual notions about myself, but the real test is the existential test, and that is, what am I going to do? Am I seeing what's happening, and am I responding in the best possible way? If I'm not, I change.
As someone once said, you can really see the nature of the animal, of the dog, when you refuse it its meat.
Exactly.
You see what its motivation is.
And in the learning, you don't go into self-condemnation. When you commit to learning leaving a life of karma yoga, or a dharmic life in the light of dharma, which is the pursuit of the good in terms of conduct, right? When you commit to it, you're going to set up a dialectic. You're going to see when you're not living that way, and then you can, which is great. When you see you're not living that way, you can turn and live rightly. Notice I'm not living rightly, live rightly. Notice I'm not living rightly, live rightly. So I'm constantly choosing or reorientating myself to the good, and recognizing.
If the good is really central, you would even welcome that exposure.
Absolutely.
Whereas in ordinary life, a person would just want to chuck that in the closet with the rest of the skeletons, right?
Right. And also, because the thing is that we don't like to see our selfishness or our vanity. We don't, when we feel angry, we love to feel self-righteous. So all of that is going to be left behind if we do this in the correct way. All right?
Brilliant. Yeah, very good, Bede.
Next time what we're going to be talking about, next time we're going to be talking about is, what does it mean to have a cognition that's free? So we're looking at conduct, right? So we've learned about what freedom in terms of conduct means. We now need to know what freedom in terms of cognition. And what frees our cognition actually is wisdom, seeing what is. And that's what we're going to talk about next time.
Well, I look forward to that. Thanks, Bede. Good on you.
See you later.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.